What if an entire town went to war? Not over land, or power, or politics, but to bury a single secret birth. It happened in 1844, deep in the mist-soaked hills of Marion County, Arkansas, a feud so violent it turned neighbors into soldiers and kin into killers. At the center of it all stood the Tutt family, respected, educated, untouchable, until one of their own was born under a shadow they would kill to erase. By the time the smoke cleared, an entire community lay in ruin. And the question still echoes through the Ozark valleys: what truth was so dark that it demanded a war to hose? Keep it hidden? It wasn't just a feud, it was a cover-up, layered in blood and family pride. Behind the gunfire and whispered vengeance was a single, forbidden secret. A child born of two rival names, whose existence could destroy them both. And to keep that secret buried, the Tutts would unleash a storm that even God himself couldn't calm. This is Shadow Stories, where we dig through history's forgotten graves to uncover what the textbooks refuse to print. So, I have to ask you, do you have the courage to hear what really happened in the shadows of Arkansas? If you do subscribe, join the investigation and tell me where you're watching from, because after this story, you'll never look at family honor the same way again. Now, I want you to picture this. It's the spring of 1844, and the Ozark Hills of North Arkansas, drenched in the scent of pine and gunpowder. Marion County sits between wilderness and civilization, a place where the law travels on horseback and justice depends on who's holding the rifle. The town of Yellville, though small, is proud. A handful of brick storefronts, a courthouse of red clay, and a church whose bell rings louder than the law. The Tutts and the Everetts, two families that built this frontier from the soil up, rule opposite ends of the valley. The Tutts, educated, political, tied to the courts and merchants. The Everetts, rugged, sharp with land and muscle, their loyalty bought with whiskey and blood. For years, their rivalry simmered quietly under Sunday smiles and courthouse greetings. But lately, something's changed. There's a tension in the air, whispers that the feud isn't about property lines or pride anymore. Some say it began with a letter that arrived from Missouri. Others claim it started with a single birth in secret, one neither family could acknowledge. And as dusk settles over the Ozarks, the church bell tolls again, slow, deliberate, like a warning to anyone who dares to look too closely at what's coming. Now, you have to understand the Tutts weren't villains in the beginning. To the people of Yellville, they were the very definition of refinement. Colonel Hansford Tutt, the family patriarch, dressed in tailored coats brought up from New Orleans, spoke Latin at the dinner table and quoted scripture with a lawyer's precision. He ran the local court like a kingdom, his word carrying more weight than any marshal's badge. His sons, William, Ben, and young Josiah, inherited their father's pride, but none of his restraint. They were handsome, educated, and dangerous, each believing the Tutt bloodline was above reproach. The family owned mills, stables, and acres of the richest land along Crooked Creek. Their influence ran through every corner of Marion County, the law, the merchants, even the church pews. But behind their elegance lay a quiet rot. The Tutts' reputation for honor masked years of corruption, debts buried in ledgers, and bribes disguised as donations. Colonel Tutt's temper was infamous, a man who smiled in public but shattered glasses behind closed doors. And beneath the grand portrait of his late wife hung a smaller, hidden frame, one that no guest was ever allowed to see. Whispers in Yellville said the Tutts guarded a secret not even their allies dared to repeat. Something personal, something shameful, the kind of truth that could turn Arkansas society against them in a heartbeat. On paper, the Tutt family were the backbone of Marion County, respectable, charitable, deeply religious. Every Sunday, the colonel sat proudly in the front pew of the white-steepled church, his Bible opened, his jaw set in quiet righteousness. He funded schoolhouses, built bridges, and even paid the sheriff's wages when the county purse ran dry. To the outside world, the Tutts were the very soul of Arkansas decency. But every illusion has its architect. Colonel Tutt's eldest son, William, was that architect. He managed the books, the farms, and, more importantly, the stories people told. If a rumor began to spread, William found its source and silenced it with coin or threat. He controlled the local paper through quiet partnerships, ensuring every issue printed the same truth. The Tutts were honorable men defending their legacy. When their rivals, the Everetts, accused them of election rigging or intimidation, the colonel smiled and hosted Sunday dinners for both sides, claiming misunderstandings among neighbors. His voice soothed tempers, but his eyes never did. Behind the facade of civility, the Tutts ruled Yellville through whispers and handshakes in smoke-filled rooms. And so, when the first whispers about a child of mixed blood, a birth that tied Tutt blood to the Everetts, began to circulate, the family was ready. They called it gossip, slander from jealous men. They smiled, donated to the church, and doubled their public generosity. But behind that polished curtain, they began preparing for war. Now, I want you to picture this: the sun setting over the Ozark Ridge, shadows crawling through Yellville's narrow streets as the Tutt family's real power awakens. While the town sleeps, messages travel by horseback across the valley, no inked letters, no witnesses, just murmured words exchanged at crossroads and river ferries. The Tutts' reach runs deeper than anyone dares admit. Colonel Tutt's influence stretches into every layer of Marion County's machinery. The sheriff, a former debtor, pardoned by Tutt gold. The judge, a cousin by marriage, whose courtroom gavel falls exactly where the colonel intends. Even the preacher, Reverend Collins, owes his church roof to Tutt lumber, and when prayers are whispered too loudly, confessions have a way of vanishing before Sunday comes. The family's youngest, Josiah, oversees a more discreet network, a circle of riders and hired men known locally as the Creek Watchers. By day, they tend cattle. By night, they deliver messages and reminders. They know every wagon that leaves town, every stranger who lingers too long. And in the back room of Tutt's mercantile, beneath ledgers and crates of flour, lies a locked drawer containing one faded birth record, sealed with wax. The name on it, if spoken aloud, could shatter everything. That single document is the reason the Tutts are building alliances, buying weapons, and sharpening blades. Because in Marion County, the only thing more dangerous than the truth is who owns it. When neighbors began whispering about strange riders in the night and wagons moving under moonlight, the Tutts had an answer for everything. Colonel Tutt dismissed the sightings with a patient smile, calling them routine business deliveries, supplies bound for the mills in Missouri. And the church, ever faithful to its benefactor, echoed his words from the pulpit. Idle minds invent devils, Reverend Collins warned one Sunday, and the Tutts serve God, not rumor. Yet the oddities grew harder to ignore. The blacksmith swore he'd seen Tutt men unloading crates stamped with army seals. A farmhand claimed he heard crying in the old Tutt barn long after midnight, the voice of a child, quickly silenced. But whenever someone pressed too far, they found themselves summoned to the colonel's parlor, offered a drink, and left with their memory softened by charm and fear. Local newspapers, conveniently funded by Tutt money, printed stories of bandit threats and traveling rustlers. The family's private guards were recast as protectors of the peace. Even the rising body count from unfortunate accidents, a hunter shot in the dark, a stable fire that burned too clean, was explained away as the price of frontier living. To the people of Yellville, the Tutts were still untouchable. But to those who looked closer, the grocer who found blood on Tutt grain sacks, the teacher who saw a forged school record, it was clear something monstrous was moving beneath the surface, and every lie that held the town together was beginning to tremble. Every empire of secrecy needs its shadow, and in the Tutt household, that shadow was Eleanor Finch, the family's trusted housekeeper. She arrived in Yellville from Little Rock a decade earlier, hired for her discretion and sharp mind. No one questioned her loyalty. No one imagined the depth of her devotion. But Eleanor was more than a caretaker. She was the silent hand that ensured the Tutts' darkest secrets never reached the ears of the curious or the brave. By day, she tended the sprawling Tutt estate with meticulous precision, polishing silver, managing ledgers, and keeping the household in perfect order. By night, she became the unseen architect of deception. Letters disappeared from the post, witnesses were guided subtly out of town, and any hint of the forbidden child was buried before it could breathe. Eleanor knew the valley roads, the forest trails, and the hidden passages in the barns better than anyone. She could move through shadows with the same ease she swept floors. Her allegiance was personal. Eleanor had grown attached to the youngest Tutt, Josiah, protecting him as if he were her own blood. She understood the stakes. If the child's existence became known, it wouldn't just disgrace the family, it would ignite a feud that could consume the county. And so, she became both protector and manipulator, managing truths and lies with a single, unwavering purpose. To outsiders, Eleanor was a loyal servant. To insiders, she was indispensable, a quiet force shaping events, deciding who saw the light and who remained in darkness. And as tensions escalated between the Tutts and the Everetts, her role would prove crucial, because sometimes the most dangerous conspirators are the ones who never raise their voice. Now, I want you to picture the people whose lives would be consumed by this feud, not the Tutts, not the Everetts, but the ordinary souls caught between ambition, pride, and secret sin. In the valley, everyone knew the Tutts' influence, but most underestimated its reach. Merchants, teachers, laborers, even children, all were vulnerable if they glimpsed the wrong truth at the wrong time. Take Samuel Harper, the blacksmith, for instance. A widower with a stubborn sense of honesty, Samuel had no stake in the feud until he saw Tutt men moving strange crates in the dead of night. He became a living witness, his livelihood and safety suddenly tethered to a secret he never wanted to know. Or consider Martha Lewis, a schoolteacher whose curiosity about Josiah's unusual lessons led her to notice inconsistencies in the Tutts family. Inconsistencies that would one day mark her for suspicion and silence. Even neighbors who seemed distant, like the widow McGinnis or young farmer Abel Thompson, became pawns in a story they didn't understand. Their vulnerabilities were simple: proximity, trust in appearances, and the inability to challenge men with guns and influence. And yet, each victim bore their own fears and hopes, unaware that the Tutts' obsession with secrecy would turn their lives upside down. The tragedy of the Tutt-Everett feud wasn't only in the bullets or broken fences. It was in the quiet terror that seeped into ordinary lives, a creeping dread that the shadows held more than just darkness. Each victim's story was a thread, slowly weaving a tapestry of fear, suspense, and unavoidable confrontation. This is where the story turns truly chilling, because sometimes the deadliest secrets are uncovered by the most ordinary eyes. That witness was Tom Raines, a young courier who delivered letters between Yellville and the neighboring towns. He was fast, quiet, and unremarkable, exactly why he survived long enough to see what no one else dared. One rainy evening, Tom was returning from a routine run to a distant farm when he took a shortcut past the Tutt estate. The wind rattled the shutters, and the smell of wet earth clung to his coat. That's when he saw it. A figure moving in the shadows, carrying a small bundle wrapped in coarse linen. The figure paused at the edge of the woods, looked around as if sensing invisible eyes, and vanished into the darkness. Tom's curiosity overcame caution. He followed, keeping to the cover of trees, until he reached a hidden clearing near Crooked Creek. There, he saw the unimaginable, a secret baptism conducted by a trembling tutor of a child whose very existence was a scandal waiting to ignite. Faces he recognized, the Tutts themselves, were bent over the tiny figure, voices whispering promises, threats, and instructions meant for no ear but their own. Tom froze, heart hammering. One misstep, one cough, and he would be discovered. The moment seared into his memory. He understood instantly that this was no ordinary family matter. This was a secret that could destroy lives, start a war, and turn the valley into a battleground. And from that night onward, Tom Raines was no longer just a courier. He was a keeper of the truth. A single spark in a tinderbox that neither family could afford to ignite. Tom Raines thought he had simply witnessed a strange, secretive ceremony, something best left unspoken. But the moment he stepped into his small, candle-lit cabin that night, a chill crept down his spine. Every shadow seemed alive, every whisper of wind a warning. Sleep evaded him as images of the Tutts, their faces twisted in a mix of fear and authority, haunted his mind. He could still hear the soft cries of the child, muffled but unbearably real. By morning, reality struck, harder. The county was abuzz with rumors, yet no one mentioned what he had seen. Neighbors laughed at old family tales, and even the sheriff shrugged off concerns as petty gossip. Tom tried to tell friends, to warn those who might be in danger, but his words were met with skepticism. "Tom, you're letting your imagination run wild," they said. "The Tutts, they wouldn't. They can't." That dismissal, that suffocating disbelief, was worse than the fear itself. Every step he took, every familiar street he walked, reminded him that the Tutts could be watching. Every creak of a floorboard, every flicker of candlelight, made him flinch. The town seemed normal to everyone else, but to Tom it had become a web of eyes, whispers, and invisible threats. And yet, denial was not his alone. Tom's own mind began to fracture under the weight of what he had seen. Was it possible? He imagined the whole thing. Could a young courier have stumbled on such a monumental secret and been mistaken? But deep in his gut, he knew the truth, and he knew that knowing it had already made him a target. The question now was terrifyingly simple. How long before the Tutts realized he knew? And when they did, would anyone survive to tell the story? Now, let's be honest for a second. The Tutts were smart. They didn't just rely on fear and secrecy, they manipulated the very institutions meant to hold them accountable. When reports of strange activity, missing neighbors, and whispered rumors began to circulate, the county held an official inquiry. On paper, it looked like justice was finally moving. A team of local officials, appointed by the courthouse, rode to the Tutt estate to investigate. But the investigation was a masterclass in plausible deniability. Colonel Tutt greeted them with impeccable manners, pouring brandy into crystal glasses, guiding them through immaculate rooms, and presenting ledgers that proved everything was in order. The investigators found no signs of wrongdoing. The barns were locked, the records neat, the servants obedient. Witnesses, who might have spoken up, were quietly persuaded to remember incorrectly or leave town entirely. Even Tom Raines, summoned as a courier with knowledge of unusual deliveries, was met with polite skepticism. "You've seen shadows in the night, boy," one official said. But shadows are not crimes. Every move the Tutts made was calculated. The inquiry's findings were predictable. A report cleared the family of any wrongdoing, attributing rumors to youthful imagination and frontier gossip. The public, relieved by the official statement, went back to their lives. But for those who knew the boast, truth, and especially for Tom, the injustice was suffocating. The law had become an accomplice, its authority wielded not to protect, but to conceal. And so, the stage was set. The Tutts' hands were clean in the eyes of the county, but stained with secrets that would soon ignite a feud more violent than anyone imagined. Because the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, has a way of clawing its way into the light. Now, you have to picture the aftermath of secrecy and violence, not the Tutts, not the Everetts, but the people whose lives were forever changed. These were the living evidence of a family feud that had erupted into something far darker than land disputes or angry words. Survivors carried scars, both visible and invisible, a walking testament to the cost of hiding a single secret birth. Take Martha Lewis, the schoolteacher who had stumbled upon inconsistencies in the Tutts' family records. By the time the feud flared into outright threats, she had lost her home, her livelihood, and her sense of safety. The fear twisted her posture, sharpened her gaze, and left a tremor in her hands whenever she tried to write or teach. She became a ghost of her former, self-cautious, watchful, and haunted by what she had seen. Then there was Samuel Harper, the blacksmith, whose courage in speaking out led to the burning of his workshop. His hands, once steady with hammer and anvil, shook as he tried to forge even the simplest tools. His wife and children had fled, leaving him isolated, a man whose livelihood and dignity had been stripped away by the Tutts' ruthless pursuit of concealment. Even the child at the center of the secret, hidden and protected by Eleanor Finch, bore the psychological weight of a world that refused to acknowledge them. They grew up in the shadows of mansions, hearing whispers and warnings, learning that innocence alone was not enough to survive in a valley ruled by fear. These altered victims were more than collateral damage. They were living evidence. Every glance, every hesitation, every whispered fear told a story that the Tutts tried to bury but could never fully erase. And for Tom Raines, watching these changes unfold, it became clear the feud was not just about family pride. It was about controlling life itself. Who would survive, who would vanish, and who would speak the truth at the cost of everything. Now, let's pause and really consider this. The Tutts didn't just act on instinct or brute force. Their approach to secrecy was methodical, almost scientific, in its precision. Every step, every threat, every concealment was calculated to eliminate risk while maintaining their public innocence. This wasn't merely a family protecting itself. It was a systematic orchestration of fear, influence, and control. Colonel Hansford Tutt kept meticulous journals, coded entries that recorded movements, alibis, and the precise timing of deliveries and disappearances. William, his eldest, created charts and maps of the valley, marking key points of observation, likely escape routes, and potential witnesses. Even small events, a chance meeting at the market, a neighbor asking too many questions, were logged and assessed. Every decision followed a cruelly rational pattern. Identify the threat, neutralize it, and ensure it never leaves evidence. The Tutts' methods extended to psychological manipulation. Witnesses like Tom Raines were observed for weeks, their routines mapped to predict reactions. Letters and messages were delivered with layers of misdirection, ensuring confusion and self-doubt. If fear alone didn't suffice, small accidents were engineered. A burned barn here, a stolen horse there, creating a veneer of frontier misfortune. And the young child at the heart of the secret, even their movements were controlled with the precision of a scientist observing an experiment. Eleanor Finch, the complicit collaborator, was the field agent, ensuring each step, each concealment, adhered to the plan. This scientific methodology wasn't cold by chance. It was a design to maintain the illusion of normalcy while orchestrating the destruction of anyone who dared to uncover the truth. The Tutts had weaponized logic itself, proving that in the right hands, method and madness could be indistinguishable. This is where the story takes a turn, because for every empire of shadows, there's someone brave enough to step into the light. Enter Elias Crawford, a former schoolteacher turned itinerant journalist, whose reputation for curiosity and courage had already begun to precede him in neighboring counties. He wasn't a soldier, nor a lawman. He was someone who believed that the truth, no matter how dangerous, deserved to be told. Elias arrived in Yellville under the guise of researching frontier life, notebooks in hand, eyes always scanning, ears attuned to whispers others dismissed. From the moment he noticed the Tutts' careful control of conversation, the subtle way Eleanor Finch directed interactions, and the fear lurking behind even the most polite townsfolk, he sensed that a story far darker than any schoolhouse tale awaited him. He was flawed, of course. Elias had debts from a failed printing press, an old injury that slowed his steps, and a pride that sometimes blinded him to danger. But those very flaws made him relatable human in a world of nearly mythic villains, and he had one personal stake that drove him, a childhood memory of his own family torn apart by lies and concealed truths. The idea that a secret could ruin lives, even before a shot was fired, struck a chord deep within Tim. When Elias first learned of the rumors surrounding a mysterious birth within the Tutt household, he didn't flinch. Instead, he felt the pulse of a story worth following, one that could expose not just a family secret, but a network of deception, fear, and power that extended through the entire valley. And little did he know, Stepping onto that path would make him a target, a man hunted not by strangers, but by the very people who smiled at Sunday dinner. Now, picture Elias Crawford slipping quietly into the Tutt estate for the first time, notebook hidden beneath his coat, heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. He wasn't just a visitor, he was a predator in a house full of predators, each movement deliberate, each smile potentially masking lethal intent. From the polished floors to the glint of silver in the dining room, every detail spoke of wealth and control. But Elias was trained to look beyond appearances. He began with careful observation. He watched Colonel Tutt in the courtroom, noting how every word commanded attention, how small gestures silenced even the boldest opposition. He observed William in the study, tallying ledgers with almost obsessive care, eyes darting toward the door whenever a servant approached. And he paid attention to Eleanor Finch, whose quiet efficiency masked an ironclad loyalty, the woman who controlled every movement within the house, including the flow of truth itself. Elias employed subtle strategies, casual conversations with servants, feigned ignorance when asked about local events, and slow, deliberate walks past barns and hidden pathways. He pieced together what others ignored, the small door behind the mill, the buried crates along the creek, the whispered instructions given in hushed tones after dusk. Each observation was a thread, gradually forming a tapestry of the Tutts' true operations. He took risks, of course. One wrong question could draw suspicion, or worse. But Elias understood the stakes. The child at the center of this dark secret, the victims altered by fear, and the larger pattern of manipulation could all be saved from obscurity if he survived long enough to record it. Every glance, every gesture, every coded action he witnessed added to a growing conviction. The Tutts had engineered a system of control so perfect it would take both cunning and courage to unravel it from the inside. Now, I need you to really picture this. You've seen the Tutts' power, their secrets, and the danger lurking in every shadow. And just like Elias Crawford, you're standing at the edge of a truth so dark it could consume anyone who dares to confront it. Can you handle what comes next? Because this is where the story turns truly chilling. The webs of deceit tighten, the stakes rise, and every step closer to the secret brings danger not just to our hero, but to anyone who watches too closely. If you've made it this far, it's time to take the next step. Subscribe, join our investigation, and share your thoughts below. Trust me, you won't want to miss what the Tutts have tried to hide for decades. Elias had been careful, meticulous, and patient, but nothing prepared him for the moment the truth revealed itself. One evening, under the cover of twilight, he followed Eleanor Finch as she carried a small, locked ledger from the Tutt estate to the barn behind the property. His pulse thundered in his chest, every step was measured, every shadow a potential threat. Peering through a crack in the barn wall, he saw her place the ledger atop a wooden crate, then retreat. Elias slipped inside, hands trembling, and pried it open. The pages were a map of secrets, birth dates, names carefully erased and overwritten, coded entries indicating transfers of money and threats, and most chilling of all, the record of a child born from the union of two rival families, the Tutts and the Everetts. Every entry confirmed what he had feared. The child, hidden from the world, was at the heart of the Tutts' entire campaign of fear and control. Notes detailed how witnesses had been manipulated or silenced, how townsfolk had been bribed or threatened, and how the feud itself was deliberately stoked to distract from the truth. Each line was a dagger, each signature a testament to calculated cruelty. Elias realized the magnitude of what he held. This ledger was more than proof, it was a weapon. With it, he could expose the Tutts and their entire operation. But it also painted a target on his back. As he left the barn, the wind carried the faint sound of footsteps behind him. He wasn't alone. The Tutts' eyes, he knew, were everywhere, and now they were watching him more closely than ever. This was the moment the investigation became a war. Proof was in hand, but survival had never been more uncertain. The moment Elias stepped out of the barn, the world seemed to close in around him. Shadows stretched long across the muddy path, and the wind carried a low, almost imperceptible sound, the crunch of boots on wet earth. He didn't need to see them to know they were coming. The Tutt's men, silent and deadly, were already tracking him. Clutching the ledger to his chest, Elias bolted toward the creek, leaping over roots and fallen branches. The moonlight glinted off the water, revealing shallow spots where he could cross without slowing, yet every splash seemed to echo through the valley like a warning. Behind him, shouts rang out, William Tutt's voice, commanding, calm, terrifying in its authority. "Stop him!" He ducked into the dense underbrush, branches tearing at his coat, mud soaking his boots. Every sense was heightened. The smell of wet pine, the cold bite of the creek on his skin, the rasp of breath too close for comfort. A misstep, a snapped twig, and it would be over. But Elias kept moving, guided by instinct, and the memory of every secret he had uncovered. Hours felt like days as he navigated the labyrinth of hills and hollows. The pursuit was relentless. Shadows flitted across the trees, figures he could barely see, voices calling out names he dared not answer. And yet, amidst the terror, Elias felt a fierce clarity. The ledger must survive. The truth must reach the world, no matter the cost. Finally, as the first pale light of dawn broke over the Ozarks, Elias emerged near the county road, bruised, exhausted, but alive. The Tutt's reach had not yet ended. But for now, he had escaped. Behind him, the valley lay silent, the feud poised to erupt again. Ahead, the five journey to expose the truth was only beginning. Elias Crawford finally stumbled into the nearest town, the ledger clutched tightly against his chest, mud streaking his coat and cuts, marking his arms and face. For a moment, he felt relief the chase was over, the Tutt's immediate threat behind him. But the illusion of safety shattered almost instantly. The town was polite, orderly, and entirely uninterested in a story about a violent feud in the hills beyond. He approached the county magistrate, presenting the ledger as proof, expecting shock, concern, action. Instead, he was met with skepticism. A young man coming in with tales of secret births and family quarrels. One official scoffed, adjusting his spectacles. "Sounds like frontier gossip to me." Another leaned back in his chair, glancing at the ledger without opening it. "These are serious accusations. Do you have witnesses?" Elias tried to explain, urgency rising in his chest, but the townsfolk weren't ready to believe that respected families, the Tutts and their allies, could orchestrate something so sinister. Newspapers required corroboration, sheriffs required legality, and the people, the ordinary people, were terrified to speak against a family whose influence reached every corner of the valley. For the first time, Elias felt the weight of isolation. He had proof, yes, but the world beyond the mountains wasn't prepared to see it. Worse, the ledger painted a target on his back, the Tutt's. Network extended further than he had imagined, and his escape hadn't gone unnoticed. Civilization, with all its supposed law and order, had turned its face away from the truth. And so, the reversal was complete. Survival did not equal justice. Evidence alone was powerless. If no one dared to act, Elias understood then that exposing the Tutts would demand more than courage. It would require strategy, allies, and a willingness to confront a society complicit in silence. The day of reckoning came quietly, yet with a tension that made the valley itself seem to hold its breath. Armed deputies, accompanied by Elias Crawford and a few brave townsfolk, approached the Tutt estate before dawn. Mist clung to the hills like a living thing, and every creaking hinge, every rustling leaf, seemed magnified in the eerie silence. They were here to uncover the truth, yet no one could predict the horrors waiting behind the polished walls. Inside the estate, the scene was both surreal and monstrous. Hidden behind a false panel in the library, they discovered a network of rooms, small, dimly lit, and suffocating. Crates lined the walls, each containing ledgers, letters, and personal effects documenting decades of manipulation, intimidation, and violence. In one room, beds were neatly made, yet every corner bore evidence of hidden confinement. Scratches on the floors, chains carefully coiled, and the faint scent of fear that lingered long after the occupants had been moved or hidden. But the most chilling discovery was a small chamber beneath the barn, accessed by a trapdoor known only to Eleanor Finch and the Tutts themselves. Inside, relics of the secret birth were preserved: toys, a cradle, garments carefully folded, and documents confirming the child's lineage, a truth the Tutts had tried to erase with every ounce of power they commanded. It was a room frozen in time, a chamber of horrors that made even the hardened deputies recoil. Elias stood at the threshold, heart pounding. This was more than a family secret. It was a meticulously orchestrated reign of control, fear, and deceit, preserved in paper, wood, and silence. And as the first light of dawn broke through the windows, the Tutts' empire of shadows began to crumble, leaving only evidence, horror, and the realization that some truths are too dark to remain hidden forever. The Tutts, carefully constructed masks of respectability, shattered under the scrutiny of Elias Crawford and the authorities. Colonel Hansford Tutt, once the embodiment of frontier dignity, was revealed as a man consumed by obsession and pride, willing to manipulate law, church, and neighbor alike to protect a secret. His smiles, measured and courteous in public, had cloaked a cruelty that touched every corner of Marion County. William Tutt, meticulous and calculating, emerged as the true architect of the family's sinister operations. His ledgers and maps were not merely records, they were instruments of control, tools that allowed him to monitor movements, manipulate witnesses, and orchestrate intimidation with surgical precision. Even his education, once admired as refinement, had been weaponized, giving him the vocabulary to justify every lie, every act of violence, and every twisted measure taken to secure the family's dominance. The youngest, Josiah, bore a more tragic mark. Handsome and clever, he had been molded into a weapon by family loyalty, his youth exploited to perpetuate the Tutts' scheme. Yet even he could not hide the fear and guilt etched into his face, a reminder that some sins leave scars even on the perpetrators. And then there was Eleanor Finch, the devoted housekeeper, whose loyalty had turned her into an enabler. Her silence and efficiency had allowed generations of secrets to persist, demonstrating that villainy is not always about intent. Sometimes it is about complicity. As the ledger, the hidden chambers, and witness testimonies came together, the public finally saw the Tutts not as noble frontier leaders, but as manipulators of life, fear, and perception. Their power, built on secrecy and violence, was unmasked, and for the first time, the Valley understood that the war over honor, land, and blood had been orchestrated to hide a single, devastating truth. Now, brace yourself, because what the Tutts tried to confine to the hills of Marion County was just the surface of a much larger, more insidious network. As Elias, Crawford, and investigators delved into the ledgers and correspondence, they discovered connections that stretched far beyond the Ozarks. Letters hinted at relatives and associates in Missouri, Tennessee, and even as far as New Orleans, all complicit in protecting the family's secrets, turning blind eyes, or actively manipulating events to maintain the illusion of honor. The Tutts' influence wasn't merely local, it was systemic. Wealthy cousins in distant towns moved money discreetly, providing hush funds for families silenced by threats. Legal and business networks ensured that records could be erased, evidence could vanish, and public inquiries could be pacified. Even merchants in other states unwittingly became part of the facade, transporting goods that masked more sinister purposes. And the most unsettling truth: the child at the center of the secret wasn't just hidden for safety. Their existence had implications that could destabilize alliances and claims to land, property, and political power across state lines. Every attempt to conceal the birth, manipulate witnesses, and orchestrate fear was part of a calculated design to control not just a family feud, but a broader network of influence. Elias realized the stakes had grown exponentially. Exposing the Tutts wasn't just about justice for a single valley. It meant confronting a web of complicity, greed, and deception that spanned states. The very mechanisms that had allowed them to dominate. Marion County could now ripple outward, threatening to undo everything Elias had fought to uncover. The feud, once thought isolated, was now revealed as part of a larger, chilling system, one where secrecy, fear, and power were traded like currency, and no one, no matter how far away, was truly safe from the consequences. Now, let's be honest, the Tutts didn't operate in a vacuum. Every empire of secrecy needs enablers, and in Marion County and beyond, society itself became an accomplice. Newspapers that could have exposed them were subtly controlled or persuaded to print only flattering stories. Merchants, officials, and clergy who might have spoken out remained silent, either out of fear, loyalty, or the promise of personal gain. Even the ordinary townsfolk played their part, though often unknowingly. Gossip was steered, suspicions deflected, and curiosity punished, with social exclusion. The fear of retribution ensured that no one questioned the narrative presented by the Tutts. A whisper could ruin a family, and people preferred comfort over confrontation. Legal authorities, tasked with justice, were complicit through inaction. The county magistrate who dismissed Elias Crawford's ledger, the sheriff who couldn't find evidence, and judges swayed by the Tutts' influence, all created a perfect system of plausible deniability. It wasn't just one man or one family hiding the truth. It was a network of compliance, deliberate or unconscious, that allowed atrocities to flourish behind the facade of civility. And so, the feud that seemed personal became societal. Silence became its weapon, indifference its shield. Those who suffered, victims, witnesses, the hidden child, were rendered invisible by the collective willingness to ignore what was uncomfortable. Elias understood that confronting the Tutts meant challenging not only their power, but the entire framework of a society that had chosen secrecy over truth. The valley, the institutions, the very people who called themselves moral, all had been complicit in maintaining the shadow. And that realization was perhaps the most chilling truth of all. The fallout from the Tutt revelations was swift, brutal, and inescapable. Colonel Hansford Tutt, once untouchable, died under house arrest, a shadow of his former commanding presence. Pride and fear had aged him faster than the years themselves, and he passed, clutching his Bible, murmuring prayers that could not undo the lives he had broken. William Tutt, the meticulous architect of the family's schemes, was tried in court, though the trial itself became a spectacle of both fear and fascination. Evidence from the hidden ledger, corroborated by witnesses like Thomas Raines and survivors of the feud, ensured his conviction. He spent the remainder of his life behind bars, his sharp mind now confined, his influence erased. Josiah Tutt, the youngest, faced a different path. He had been molded by the family's obsession with secrecy, but his youth and naivety spared him the harshest punishment. He was placed under the care of distant relatives, forced to reconcile the blood he carried with the crimes he had witnessed. Guilt lingered, a lifelong companion, a reminder that even those raised in shadows carry responsibility. Eleanor Finch, whose loyalty had enabled the Tutts' empire of fear, faded into obscurity. Her complicity was never fully punished, though whispers of her role followed her to the end of her days. Some claimed she lived quietly in the outskirts, a woman haunted not by law, but by conscience. And then there was Elias Crawford, the hero who risked everything to reveal the truth. Though scarred by the pursuit, the isolation, and the horrors he witnessed, he survived. His articles and journals became a testament to courage, exposing the Tutts' crimes and ensuring the story of the valley, the child, and the feud would never be forgotten. The valley itself bore the scars, but slowly, light returned. The key players' fates were sealed, some through justice, some through conscience, and some by the unyielding passage of time. Yet, the legacy of fear, secrecy, and human flaw lingered, a cautionary tale for generations to come. Now, let's step back and consider the valley long after the Tutts' reign of fear ended. The hills and rivers remained, unchanged by time, but the memories of deceit, violence, and secrecy lingered like a shadow over every farmhouse and town street. The feud had left a mark not only on those directly involved, but on the entire community, a lesson etched in blood, fear, and courage. The legacy of the Tutt family was paradoxical. On one hand, they demonstrated the extremes of human cunning, ambition, and ruthlessness, showing how power, when unchecked, can corrupt entirely. On the other, their downfall became a testament to the resilience of truth and the courage of individuals like Elias Crawford. It proved that even in the darkest corners, persistence, observation, and moral conviction could pierce the veil of secrecy. Society, too, was forced to reckon with its complicity. Those who had turned a blind eye, whispered rumors, or chosen comfort over courage were left with the uneasy knowledge that silence can enable atrocities. The valley learned slowly, painfully, that secrets do not remain buried forever. They fester, they infect, and eventually, they demand reckoning. And perhaps the most haunting moral is this: darkness often thrives not in the absence of law, but in the apathy of those who enforce it. Every secret birth, every manipulated ledger, every silenced witness reminds us that vigilance and courage are not optional. The Tutt Feud serves as a stark reminder. History's darkest truths are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. Now, I want you to pause and imagine everything we've uncovered: the Tutt's empire of fear, the hidden child, the victims forever altered, and the lengths some will go to protect a secret. What do you think of this story? Could such horrors really remain hidden for so long? And ask yourself, could something similar be happening today, just out of sight? If this story has gripped you, if the shadows of the Tutt family still haunt your thoughts, I challenge you to take part in our investigation. Subscribe to Shadow Stories. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this tale with others who dare to confront the truth. Let's not allow history's darkest secrets to remain buried. And remember, the valley, the feud, the Tutts, this is only one shadow among many. In our next video, we will uncover another hidden story that challenges everything we thought we knew about American history. Secrets, lies, and truths waiting in the dark. Are you ready to step into them?